Welcome to Wander Mode, a podcast that wanders through topics such as entrepreneurship, traveling, and mamahood. As a teacher turned entrepreneur and a mama to one, I am sharing my tips and tricks to maintain harmony in a multifaceted life. Let's wander. Friends, get ready for some serious fun because we've got the amazing Kristin Nilson on the podcast today. She's the word weaver behind Worldwide Crush, a novel that'll have you hooked from the first page, because who doesn't remember their first celebrity crush? Kristin isn't just an author, and today we're going to peel back the layers and get to know the mom, the wordsmith, and the pro-crushologist, in her words, behind the podcast Pop Culture Preservation Society. Let's dive into Kristin's world.
Oh, hi, Julie. Thank you so much for having me.
Kristin, I am really excited to share space with you today. And I thought that a fun question to get us started would be, if your life as a woman and a mom were a book genre, what would the genre and title be?
This is so funny. This is such a creative question. And I thought this would be super hard. I was like, what am I going to say? And then once I got the first answer, I was like, boom, the genre is humor. The reason being, well, Worldwide Crush is a pretty, I don't want to toot my own horn. I think it's a funny book. I meant for it to be funny, and I think people are laughing. So that's kind of my wheelhouse. And that's how I started writing, is I took kind of the frustration and ridiculousness of the things in motherhood, and I started just writing down on anywhere, like on the backs of receipts and, scrap paper. I would just write down these little rants that ended up kind of cracking me up. And that became my writing voice. That's where that came from. So pretty much everything that I write has some element of humor in it. The title of the book is The CEO of Long Sleeve T-Shirts. And it comes from...
You have to say more about that.
This is why. This is a seminal moment in my motherhood journey. There was a moment where my husband was leaving for work and he was going off to some big important meeting with big important people who were going to talk about big important things and then tell him how great he was and then compensate him handsomely for it. And he asked me, "What are you going to do today?" And I said, "I have to go to Target and get long sleeve T-shirts." And I just felt so bereft. Somebody's got to get the T-shirts. Somebody had, and it was my job. And I said, "I feel like the CEO of long sleeve T-shirts." It was a moment for the two of us because he started to understand my frustration that I was watching him do these big, important things. And although he will swear up and down, all husbands do, like, "You have the most important job in the world." Okay, yeah, maybe it's not super fulfilling to go to Target and buy long sleeve T-shirts. Making humans is really important, and that's fulfilling, but all of the little tasks that go along with it are not super fulfilling. And so there was this stark contrast between the contributions he was making to the world and the contributions that I was making to the world. And he used to travel a lot, and he would call me and tell me about these big dinners that he was having at these really nice restaurants. And I eventually had a rule: you can't tell me about your nice dinners anymore, because I just ate some leftover macaroni and cheese and some crust from your child's sandwich. And that was my dinner. And I ate it with one hand because my other hand was trying to keep him from falling out of the high chair. And so he gets it, but he only gets it after I show him because he's not there watching it, right? So we still talk about me being the CEO of long sleeve T-shirts.
Your son is now in his 20s.
He's 21 years old. He's in college. I'm officially an empty nester, which is an important part of my motherhood journey.
Wow. And I definitely want to hear about that transition as an empty nester. Would you say that life in the mundane, as you're saying, or this feeling that what your husband was out doing in some ways held a lot more importance and, that sexiness of life compared to yours, would you say that continued through the 21 years, or would you say that there was a core set of years where that was more evident than not?
It's certainly more evident when your children are young. And part of that is because as your children get older, the problems get bigger. And so, not that that's fulfilling dealing with my child's problems. That's not fulfilling at all. But your purpose becomes the import of it really, really grows. And I hope that other people don't have big problems as their children approach adolescence. But the truth is, adolescence today is really hard, and kids are riddled with anxiety and depression. And it's just a part of how we live today, which wasn't necessarily the same for us when we were growing up. And that's a whole different conversation, right? Nonetheless, even as he grew older, I was still in charge of the long sleeve t-shirts. Now that he is in college, he gets his own long sleeve t-shirts. Or if he calls me for long sleeve t-shirts, I'll say, why don't you get on Amazon and get some? And so my job has become guiding him instead of providing for him. And I just have to say, I love parenting adults. It's so rewarding. It's so nice. Our parenting journey as millennials and Gen Xers will go on a lot longer than our parents' parenting journey. Our parents kind of cut us loose, right? We're not cutting our kids loose. They need us a lot longer. I have friends whose kids are 30 and still calling, on a daily basis, needing help and guidance. But parenting them when they're adults, I feel I've moved from childcare to actual parenting. That's what it feels like. And it's a lot more rewarding.
So I'm sitting here listening to you talk about this, and I am a mom of a 3-year-old right now. So obviously I'm a little more in the mundane side of things.
Yeah.
Still. We're just exiting diapers actually as of yesterday on our overnight. So she's been potty trained for a while, but yesterday was our first official, no more diapers even at nighttime.
It's big.
It's big, right? But it's still washing lunch boxes and making the breakfast and the lunch that go in the lunch boxes and the daycare drop off and that sort of thing. How has your journey transformed your identity or your self-discovery in the last 21 years? Because you've now gone from that to empty nester. So tell me a little bit about how that journey has evolved.
Oh man, these questions are so good because they're making me reflect on this story that I am. I am a story, right? And we are not fully formed humans when we start our parenting journey. And you learn so much by the time your kid is 21, and I'm still learning. That being said, here's the thing that came to me just recently is that my book, Worldwide Crush, which is a book written for teens and tweens, but is actually being read an awful lot by adults, and this is the reason, there is no worldwide crush without my motherhood experience, because I was writing it at the same time that I was mothering a middle schooler. And so the main character is a 7th grade girl. Let's be honest, I'm that 7th grade girl. I'm writing my 7th grade experience into that book. But what I realized is I was also the mother. And I was writing my motherhood story of what it was like to mother a 7th grader into that book. I occupied both of those characters. And so that is what I'm hearing from people about. I'm hearing from mothers saying, you just got me. I felt the pain of that girl who wanted tickets to the concert so badly, and it all rested on your shoulders. It was your responsibility to get the tickets, and I couldn't get the tickets. And I didn't know until I finished the book. I wrote a book about a girl with a celebrity crush, and I didn't know until I finished the book that I had written a book about mothers and daughters. Smacked me in the face.
Wow.
But along with that, what I learned about myself as I went through this motherhood experience, I learned that I can't survive without exercising the creative part of myself, because there is so much that goes into childcare. There's a lot of childcare in the beginning, and that childcare usurps a lot of not just your time, but also your brain space, your bandwidth. And it can be really hard to carve out space to do anything else. And I became deeply unhappy and frustrated. That was really good information for me. It meant that I had to do things differently, that this creative part of my life is vital to my survival. It's not just a hobby. It's not just a side gig. It's not just a side hustle. It was vital to becoming human. The other thing that I learned is that I am tough as nails. Do you need a bus lifted off of a toddler? I can do it. My family survived because of me. My husband is the best father in the world. But my family survived because of me. Because as I know a lot of people listening will understand, there is nothing that you won't do to help your child be happy? There is nothing. I jumped through all the hoops. I made all the phone calls. I devoted my whole entire being to making this child happy. Now, is that healthy? That's a question. We can talk about that all day long. But what I realize is that if I hadn't shouldered the burden, we might be in a very different place right now. And I realized I got to the other side. I did it. And it's all on me. And my husband depended on me for that too. I'm not trying to short sell him and his contribution. He also recognized that I could lift the bus off the toddler. And he's like, I need you to do this, Kristin. And I did it.
That partnership.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that that is the way that it is in most families. It's the mom who has the internal strength to bear the burden of just about anything that comes your way, especially when you know there's nothing that I won't do. There's nothing that I cannot do, because that's what you start saying to yourself. There's nothing that I cannot do. I will do it all. I will do it all for this child.
And really, I think that's just such a biological piece that's in humans, but also animals. You know, when you look at typical caretakers, even amongst animals, it's the mom, and sometimes even all female groups of animals that are collaborating and working together to raise these little creatures. And it's not that the male role doesn't matter, that there isn't a significant aspect of that. Like, it was interesting. I just saw this video out of one of the parks in California with this pair of eagles caring for the egg in their nest, and they take turns consistently, you know, but the female eagle is still very much the one in control. She's the one who sets the rules. She's the one who knows the plan, right?
Yeah, that is so true. And a lot of it comes down to research, right? And my husband would be like, what did you find out today? Because I'm going to keep researching until I find the answer. I'm going to keep making phone calls. I'm going to keep asking until I find the answer. And he depended on me to do that.
So I met Kristin at a book club, and all the ladies in this book club had read the Worldwide Crush book. Amazing. And we are for sure talking about it today because it is so special. But it was fascinating as we were going around and asking some questions. One of the gals in our book club got very emotional and teared up when she was telling you, Kristin, that book resonated with her as a mom. You said that you really ended up writing a book about mothers and daughters. And you can tell that you were writing it from both perspectives because you took me back to my teenage self. But equally, as I was sitting there reading this book, and again, my daughter's only 3, but I want this relationship with her that's so tightly bonded, and having that experience of the mom in the book where at times her daughter was just pushing her away and so embarrassed and whatever. My heart like physically hurt reading those parts. And so you weave together this beautiful story because you were the parent of the middle schooler and the mom of the middle schooler at the same time. So how old was he specifically when you started writing the book?
He was probably about 11 when I started writing in earnest. And I wrote it all through the entirety of middle school. And I was also working in a middle school library at the time. So I was surrounded by all of these kids. And I was also, you know, friends with all of their moms. And so I'm witnessing the parents trying so hard to connect with their middle schoolers. And I'm watching the middle schoolers get so frustrated that the moms are not understanding what they mean or not understanding how important something was to them. That's the big one. Something can be very, very important to them. But to an adult, you know, it's kind of trivial. This does or does not matter according to an adult perspective. And so really it's a cry for, listen, when they say it's important, you jump in, you have to honor that is important to them. We get so stuck in our adult brains and we forget who we were in 7th grade. And that's really all I want people to do. Just remember what it was like to be in 7th grade. And so that mothering part, the mother is me as I'm parenting a middle schooler, but I'm also remembering what it was like when I was pushing my own mom away and how she was sort of at a loss. Like, I don't get it. I don't know. I'm trying here. And we're just missing each other. And I even understood at the time when I was in 7th grade, I could see how that made her sad. And it's just kind of a reality of life. We go through this bumpy period.
And really developmentally where you're seeking that dependence. When you were talking about researching, having the answers on how to parent. So I taught middle school, so 7th grade, 12 and 13-year-olds. and I have a 3-year-old. And developmentally in their brains, they're experiencing the same detachment progression from their parents. So at around the age of 2, that's when little toddlers start to recognize that they are actually independent of their mothers. They start to recognize that they can make different choices than their mothers. And that's where you hear about the terrible twos or the
Sure.
three-nagers, right?
Mhm.
You see the same thing. We didn't have the terrible twos, but we're a little bit in the three-nager stage.
Yep.
Um,
Mhm.
it's interesting to me because as I think back to my middle schoolers and teaching them, their parents were saying the exact same thing. It feels like they're separating from me. They're wanting to make different decisions in the family. They care more about their friends. And when I was reading this book, it said, yes, that the actual developmental phase is the same. It's just advanced by 10 years.
The topics are just different. I remember, this is such good information. I remember somebody telling me when Liam was 3, it must have been a yoga teacher or something like that. They said, when your child is 3 years old, they get their own aura. Before 3 years old, you are sharing an aura.
Mm.
And I was kind of like, I love sharing an aura with you. I'm not sure that I'm ready to have you have your own aura, but it makes perfect sense. They are three-nagers. That's a great word.
Yeah, and it's like that push and pull of, as a mom, this is what you want, right? You want
Yeah.
them to be
Yeah.
independent and who they're meant to become. But
Yeah.
then, like you said, at the same time, you're also not ready to have them have their own aura. I
Yeah.
wrote that down. That is a beautiful way of saying it.
I wasn't ready.
Yeah.
Whereas when he was in middle school, I was ready for him to be independent. And I loved watching him decide that he was going to do something on his own and not need me as much. That felt like success to me. And that's where I felt my job loosening up. And it's the same thing now in adulthood. My job has changed tremendously. The importance of my job has not lessened at all, but my role is different. It's just providing advice when he asks for it, pretty much. Which he does. He does ask for it. It's almost as if the less you tell your child, the more they'll come to you. If you tell constantly, this is the same for middle schoolers too. If you're constantly telling them what they should do, here's what you should do. You should sign up for this. You need to do this. You need to get a tutor. The more you tell, the less they're listening. If you don't tell, they'll come and ask you, what should I do, Mom?
And it's all those years in order to get them to want to come back to you for the advice at
Yeah.
21. You have to set that up a long time before that.
You do. Yeah.
Now, did you feel a parenting shift happen for you as you're writing this book because you were so grounded in who you were as a 7th grader? Did you feel a shift in the way that you parented where you had some big aha moments at that time that you needed to do things differently with him?
That's a really good question. And I've never thought about that before, and I didn't notice that. But now that I think about it, there was a huge shift. And the shift came in listening and validating. Instead of hurting, we do a lot of, I'm talking about HERD hurting, not HURT. There's a lot of hurting of your children when they're toddlers, preschoolers, elementary schoolers. We're taking them where they need to go and telling them what they need to do. And the shift came when I realized that I needed to listen and validate. Listen and validate. It was sort of like this symbiotic relationship. Not that we didn't have our battles because I really wanted him to do something and I needed to tell him that he was doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. But there was a huge shift there where I sat back a little bit and allowed him to rant or yell at me. When he yelled at me, there are 2 ways to approach it when your child is yelling at you at that age. And my husband's reaction is to say, you do not speak to me that way. When you do that, and poor Mike, I'm throwing him under the bus. He's a really good dad, but we all learn different things at different times, right? When you turn it to, you do not speak to me that way, you're not actually hearing what he has to say. When my kid is yelling at me when he's 12, 13 years old, like really yelling, I take notice. Something is really wrong. Something is important to him. What is he saying? He's hurting about something. I pay attention. And instead of yelling back, I go, let me think about that. And then I formulate my response. It's just a signal flare that he's throwing up, that something is deeply, deeply important to him and nobody is listening. So that's a major shift from the childcare that took place prior to that. And it could be it was because I was occupying my 7th grade self as I was writing that book. And I was feeling that same frustration that nobody was listening to me. I felt invisible and nobody could understand what I was needing or wanting or feeling. And I didn't really have the confidence to shout it. It was so internal, and I needed somebody to recognize me and validate me. And that's in pretty short supply when you're in middle school.
If you think about it, even as adults, if you're not typically a yeller and
Yep.
all of a sudden you're yelling, somebody
Yep.
should probably be paying attention to that, because that is a
Yep.
big shift. Really, you're communicating something so much bigger than just the volume at which you're
Yes.
talking. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it may be disrespectful on its surface, and you can have a conversation about that, but afterwards, afterwards, don't do it in the moment. But as parents, we really want to remain the authority figures and maintain that level of respect. They respect you. You're not going to lose your authority. Just
Mm-hmm.
listen.
Well, and I think it's one of the beautiful things about the Worldwide Crush book is that when you are reading it as an adult and you are thinking back to who you were at that time, and again, I'm going to say from personal experience, I really felt like I was back in 7th grade during those moments. I think that there's a lot of power about reading that as an adult, because it really shifts you back into that mindset. I don't think that sometimes as adults, there's very many moments at which we really take pause to think back to who we used to be. I mean, maybe if you're in therapy or you're processing different things, but just in general, how often are we actually really putting ourselves back in the mindset of who we were at different ages?
It's true. We forget we are so grounded in who we are in the moment. And yet, in order to parent effectively, we have to have a connection with that person. We have to have a connection with ourselves in 7th grade in order to parent a 7th grader in a loving way. It's vital. Or to teach them, or to serve them, or to provide therapy for them, or whatever. It's very difficult to identify with a 7th grader if you can't remember what you yourself were like in 7th grade.
That relationship building piece where you're trying to find that like common thread of the I get it, just like we do
I
with our
feel your
friends.
fear.
Mm-hmm.
I feel your fear, or I feel your frustration. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I know from raising a little one right now, I do feel like in a lot of what I've read, there is a bit of a cultural shift toward acknowledging feelings in general. So I'm like keeping my fingers crossed that those are things that I continue to remember as she gets older. And I know my experience as a teacher will already shape me that direction anyways. But there is a movement now of, rather than telling our kids like, stop crying or you're fine or whatever, saying, yeah, I can see that you're frustrated, or I can tell that that's really making you mad. Because I am hearing that a lot more now. And my mom had even commented to me, she's like, that would never have been something we would have read as parents.
Oh, no. Well, and the trick is, and this is why our parents are kind of opposed to it, the trick is being able to be that listening parent to a toddler or a preschooler and provide limits at the same time, because they crave limits. You can't do it without limits. And so who's the person out there who's going to teach us how to do both at the same time?
Yeah.
Because it seems to be really one or the other, right? In our parents' generation, it was all about the limits. And now we can be all about the listening. But there's a lot of, truthfully, in like toddlerhood, there's a lot of dog training. It's a lot of establishing who's in charge and what you do when mama says what. But how can you do that compassionately and listen at the same time?
It's living life in the middle, right? It's not an all or nothing. Like we don't need to be in these extremes. One thing I wanted to come back to you on, you had commented, you're tough as nails, but you also recognized that your creativity mattered and that was like an aspect of you that had gone away. So I started my podcasting journey in June and I left teaching. I was leaving behind this job that I absolutely loved. And I was definitely having these moments of feeling a little bit lost in who I was, because I was no longer a teacher. We're starting kind of this new entrepreneurship journey, my husband and I are, because I had been so mom focused for 2.5 years, and so teacher focused for 16 years, I guess. It was a little bit of that lack of creativity and who am I and how am I fueling myself? And so when you had said that you had realized like your creativity mattered and that you really needed to tap back into that in order to be healthy again, tell me more about that and that journey to finding that. Did you know that it was going to be writing this book for you?
I contend that everybody needs a creative outlet. Our husbands need creative outlets. Everybody needs a creative outlet of some kind. We just need to recognize how to make it fit in this frantic world that we live in, especially with small children. Here's how it started for me. When Liam was 4 years old, I was just floundering. I was overwhelmed. I was overstimulated, and I was lacking. It was like running in hyper speed and getting nowhere. That's what it felt like. And at the same time, being so utterly connected to this child that it was hard for me to give him up to childcare. I had a really unhealthy relationship with childcare, actually, where I craved childcare desperately, but it was hard for me to pull the trigger because of money. I didn't feel right about spending the money when I myself didn't bring any money in, when it was my job to take care of him and I wasn't making any money. So I'm going to spend money to have somebody take care of him. Well, those are all really faulty arguments because my job was 24 hours a day. It's not
getting paid very much per hour for that.
Getting no money and working 24 hours a day. I do need childcare, and my husband traveled a lot. So I went to an astrologer who was a former nun. Somehow, because she was a nun, I was like, I can really trust her. That it's not wackadoo because she's a nun. And what she told me really changed my life. She said, starting in the fall, you are really going to make a turn into your artistic life and you will become an artist. At that time, I was taking guitar lessons and I was like, it's got to be like guitar. Am I going to like join a band? But truthfully, I knew like one exercise on the guitar, like not even a song. I couldn't even play a whole song, but it was the only thing that I knew that it could be. And I was playing guitar because of something called the Artist's Way. If anybody knows about the Artist's Way, this is kind of what started me on this creative journey. Put it in your show notes because it will change your life. And so the Artist's Way made me buy a guitar and made me take guitar lessons. And then I could plunk out one very bad exercise, not even one song. But at the same time, I was also writing these little rants on the pieces of scrap paper. I was writing things constantly, and it was all about my experience, the person I was behind in Target, the long sleeve t-shirts, right? Like all these things that I ran into during the day, whether it was my own experience or something that I was observing, I was writing this stuff down constantly. I just wasn't putting it together that I was writing. And then one day I walked into Great Harvest Bakery. And there was a sign that said they were having a writing contest, an essay contest. And the theme was why I loathed the 70s. Get it? Loathed, because it's a bread store. Why I loathed the 70s. And an essay came to me like it downloaded into my brain immediately. And I ran home and I wrote it all down and I sent it off to Great Harvest. It was a national contest and I won it.
Holy buckets.
I know. And so then I started thinking about other ways that I could start writing. And I did magazines for a while. I submitted to a lot of things and I just sort of dreamed. I didn't do anything that was official for a long time. And then eventually the world of blogging erupted. And I was moving to New England from Minnesota. And in order to stay in touch with people in Minnesota, I started a blog. That was my excuse, because of course I'm not calling myself a writer. I'm not a real writer. I'm just updating people on my experience. And then a friend of mine who was a young adult author scheduled, we were going out to lunch, but basically it was like she was scheduling a meeting with me. And we sat down and she said, Kristin, I want you to write a novel. And I said, I can't. I don't write fiction. I'm just writing these newsy tidbits. And she said, I want you to do it anyway. And she had such authority. I was like, okay.
Fine.
All right. She said I should, okay, I'll do it. And that's when I started. And I turned into a novelist. And so this nun/astrologist was right. She was right. She said, by September, you will be an artist. I won the essay contest in September.
Unreal. That is
It's
unreal.
crazy. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're going to have to now explain that whole process because, okay, so you agree to this book, this nun turn astrologist tells you that you're about to embark on this creative path. So then what? Like, I mean, do you go out and buy yourself a computer? Did you start taking classes? Like, how did you transition from, I'm going to kind of blog these little tidbits, to coming up with the idea for an entire novel?
Well, one thing that I had noticed is that in my blog posts, I would weave in little biographical bits, a lot of it about my childhood. And this is where the Pop Culture Preservation Society comes in, because I had an attachment to a lot of the things that I grew up with, especially like my crushes, the people that I fell in love with when I was 10, 11, and 12 years old, because I would connect with people who also had the same crushes. This is the best way to be friends with somebody. Like if you go to a party and you're meeting people, don't say, "What do you do?" Say, "Who was your first crush?"
I love that.
People get so excited. They're like, "Oh, it was Joey McIntyre," right? They'll be your friend instantly instead of saying, "I work in accounts payable." That's not fun to talk about, right? So I was a children's librarian. So I was never going to write an adult book. I was always going to write, if I were to write a book, it was always going to be a children's book because I read children's books. I recommended children's books. I worked with children. And a lot of these biographical pieces were from my childhood. And so I just started jotting notes about a character who had a lot of the same frustrations and likes and dislikes as I did. And then after having, a fair amount of random notes that weren't connected in any way, shape, or form, I signed up for a class called How to Start Your Novel. And the first exercise that they did was asking us to write an essay in which you incorporated all of the sensory detail in a scene. What color were the walls? What did the couch feel like? What were you looking at? What were you hearing? What were you feeling? And what I wrote in that class, in that exercise, was the last scene of Worldwide Crush. And I knew it. I had it in my hand. I'm like, this is my story. This is where it ends. I just have to figure out how to get here. And so for about 5 years, I figured out how to get to the end.
And how do you maintain the motivation? I mean, 5 years is a long time to be pursuing something. What did you tap into to keep going?
I think when you're doing something creative, that's not the same kind of problem, right? Again, if you're working in accounts payable, it's probably a little less motivating unless, really get off on numbers, which some people do. But it feels personal. You're making friends with these characters. These characters become a part of your life. You're invested in what happens to them. So motivation was not an issue. I never flagged. The only thing that was frustrating was that I couldn't go fast enough, that I didn't have more time, that I didn't have more concentration, because I wanted to spend time with these people all the time. And that wasn't possible, given that I was the primary caregiver. So yeah, maintaining motivation and interest, not a problem. I would say if you lose interest, if you lose motivation, that might not be the project. You might have to start a different project, find different characters, find a different medium, find something different. It's all experimentation. Most people, I would say, this was the first book that I started, and it did end up being my first published book. I think that's pretty rare. I think more often people start a book, start another book, they finish it, that one doesn't get published, they start another book and finish it, maybe that one gets published. So I think this is the unusual story. If you lose interest in it, you might want to try something different.
Thinking about that piece where it's like you're so invested in it and you knew that was the ending of your story. For those who haven't read Worldwide Crush, tell us a little bit about that story, because you had this massive crush on Sean Cassidy.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So talk about the context of that, because that, I think, helps people paint a picture of why you were able to stay passionate about it for so long.
Yeah, because it felt very, very personal. So the entire story is inspired by my own childhood crush. So I fell in love for the first time in 1977. When I was 10 years old, and I fell in love with Sean Cassidy, who played Joe Hardy on the Hardy Boys TV series. And oh God, he was just so beautiful with his soft feathered hair, and he had super tight bell bottoms on, and I just loved him. And so I was really fascinated. I've always been fascinated with that phenomenon, the phenomenon of falling in love with a celebrity for the first time, because those of you who have experienced it know that it feels very real. And I love to hear who other people's crushes are and to see what their feelings are about it. Because generally, when you get to a certain age, when you reach adulthood, you start to feel very nostalgic for it. When you reach adolescence or your 20s, you might be embarrassed by it. Like, oh my God, how do you fall in love with somebody you've never even met before? I was so naive. How do you have real feelings for somebody that's just it's not even a real person? Well, there's science behind it, right? You fall in love with a person that is so far removed from you because you're not ready for a real relationship. It is your first attempt at love. And it's a very, very safe way to fall in love because you can't be rejected. There's no rejection when you fall in love with a celebrity, and you can envision everything that relationship is. There's no one who's ruining the story for you. There are no expectations that they don't meet. It's a relationship in your head. And it's kind of a way of you experimenting with what you would be like in a relationship, what you want out of a relationship, what kind of person you would like to fall in love with in real life. And so this is all a part of our development. It's allowing us to as we get closer and closer to being sexual beings, it's allowing us to experiment with that without yet being sexual beings. People get really freaked out by the fact that I'm admitting to the world, letting it be known that 10-year-olds fall in love. And I was told over and over again by publishers that this was not appropriate, that this was not an admirable thing that we should be promoting for children, which is super sad when we talk about the need to validate kids, because what you're essentially saying is you're doing it wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. You should be ashamed of that. When in actuality, it's a super helpful part of growing up. It's helping you safely become the person that you want to be. And hopefully, like for me, I look at Sean Cassidy, what a great boyfriend he would have been, right?
Totally.
And right. And I made up in my head that he loved his mother and he loved puppies and we would go horseback riding in the surf. Those are all such super clean, lovely aspirations. That's what we should all want out of a relationship. So when we get to having in real life relationships, it doesn't often look like that, but you still need something to aim for so that when you feel like he doesn't love his mother and he doesn't like puppies, you can be like, I don't think he's very nice. I don't think I want to go out with him anymore. That's probably a pretty good instinct. We should listen to that.
I loved what you said, that in some ways it's a safe space to explore love for the first time. And why wouldn't you want to encourage that?
That's right. Yeah. That's right. It's a form of preparation, and it's a way for them to experience the world of love without being pushed into something they're not comfortable with. That's the alternative. We start going out with, I'm doing going out in quotes, because if you're in 7th grade or 8th grade, you're not going anywhere. But you might feel pushed to do something that you're not ready for. That never happens in a celebrity crush. Ever. Nobody ever pushes you to try something that you're not ready for. You only can do what you're ready for in these crushes in your imagination. And so it's allowing you to take baby steps until you are ready for something that's in real life, which is essentially what happens in Worldwide Crush. It's part of her development. She's just not ready for what's happening in real life, but hopefully this experience will get her a little bit closer in a way that is safe and healthy and natural.
Something that dawned on me as you were sharing this is I think about even my daughter right now at 3, and I would say most parents, when they're looking at their kids, I would say maybe 5 or younger, how many times do we encourage pretend play? Right?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, your unicorn's real. Right now, my daughter's super into Paw Patrol. So, I'm always Ryder and she's always Sky, and we're always going to save the unicorn or save the puppy or whatever it is that we're saving. And I always encourage that play because I recognize that for her too, sometimes she uses that play, like you're saying, to test her boundaries. What is she comfortable with? Her favorite stuffed animal is this unicorn that we call Luna. And most of the time, Luna has to try things before my daughter will try things. So Luna's going to try that swing, or Luna's going to try that slide, or Luna's going to try going across that balance beam, right? Because she needs to see it play out in her mind to then determine what her limits are. And as you were talking, I'm thinking, why, whether it's publishers who are rejecting your idea saying it's not appropriate, or whether you're a parent saying it's not appropriate to have this crush, why does that aspect of pretending an imagination go away just because you're older,
Yeah.
and then somehow that imagination or that pretend play becomes inappropriate?
Isn't that funny? And it's because we put our adult values over the top. We don't realize that this is happening in their imagination, and we get worried that this is sexual in nature. There's nothing sexual about it. Worldwide crush, there's not even a kiss, right? That's not what this is. And generally when you're 9, 10, 11 years old and you're fantasizing about whoever your crush is at the moment, it's not sexual in any way, shape, or form. Maybe there's a hug. It's just like I said before, you only can imagine what you're ready for. And so your 9-year-old is not fantasizing about making out. And the truth is that these crushes can start much, much earlier than adults are comfortable with. Again, because we're putting our adult knowledge over the top of it. It's not uncommon for 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds to have crushes because our development does start that early. And these crushes are a great place to put that energy. But it can be a little jarring for a parent to hear that their 6-year-old is in love with Harry Styles because they see Harry Styles as a grown man and they think that's inappropriate and that's gross. It's really like window shopping is what it is. They're window shopping for the person that they might be in love with as an adult. Your 6-year-old is not going to go up to Harry Styles and stick their tongue down his throat. That's not what this is about. We have to understand that children will only imagine what they are comfortable with. They can't imagine beyond that. It's us who can imagine beyond that, and that's why we get freaked out. But we just let them do whatever their imagination allows them to because that's what's helping them in the moment.
It's an experience that all of us, most of us, have probably had anyways with this crush. So if we can pause as our adult selves and think back to those moments when we had that person that we thought about, then there's some relatability there. I mean, I was even listening to Julia Dreyfus's podcast, Wiser Than Me. And this was after I had met you. And she starts talking about how she had this celebrity crush and she came downstairs to the kitchen where her mom was in go-go boots and a swimsuit and was just convinced that if she wrote this letter and sent this picture that they were going to get married and they were going to have this family. And I mean, I'm sitting there listening to it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is worldwide crush. Like this is literally like she's saying this out loud. And as you said, like go into a party and anybody's going to be excited about responding to that question versus what do you do here in the company? So it is so relatable. And again, it comes back to we forget. We
just forget. And this is, at this point, this is a generational phenomenon. It's universal in every generation, starting in the rock and roll era, really. So now we're at the point where even our grandmas, you can ask a grandma who was your first crush, and it might be Paul McCartney, or it might be Davy Jones, right? Those are the people who are grandparenting right now. The grandmothers had crushes, the mothers had crushes, the children are having crushes. And so we have to recognize that there's obviously a purpose here if this keeps happening over and over and over again. And we just have to tap into who we were when it happened so that we can see that it's a safe space. And super fun, really, really fun. Don't rob them of that fun.
And you're creating that safe and fun space through your podcast, correct? Like Pop Culture Preservation Society is all about preserving that love of pop culture, right? And those crushes that we all have had. Tell me a little bit about your podcast.
So the podcast is, the tagline is Your Gen X Childhood and a Podcast. So for people born between the years 1965 and 1980, roughly, we all sort of had some of the same pop culture references. And when I would talk to who are my co-hosts now, they were just my friends at the time, we would get into these hilarious conversations about Sean Cassidy and Parker Stevenson and Pinky Tuscadero and Fonzie and Mork and Mindy. And we all would get so giddy about remembering these things. And we realized that we needed to talk about them because as our children got older, there would be more and more people who didn't know what we were talking about. And this is how the whole thing started because I got freaked out when one day I made a Brady Bunch reference. Something came at my face, something flew at my face and I covered up my nose and I went, my nose! which is when Marsha Brady gets her nose broken with a football. And my son looked at me like, what? And it just washed over me. He doesn't know what I'm talking about. And that scared me. That scared me. And so the three of us, Carolyn, Kristin, and Michelle, got together to start talking about these super funny things that were so important to us when we were kids and celebrating the fact that we had some really fun things to talk about when we were kids. And it's a different thing back then than it is now because we didn't have the siloing that we do now with Spotify and streaming and stuff like that. Little House on the Prairie was on Monday night. Happy Days was on Tuesday nights. Love Boat was on Saturday night. And so we all watched the same thing. We all listened to the same radio stations. And I guess you could say that aren't our kids lucky they have all this choice? But we had a shared culture. We had something that we all connected with at the same time. When Fonzie jumped the shark, the next day at school, guess what every single person in my class was talking about? The fact that Fonzie jumped the shark. Everybody knew, and we could all connect over it. Whereas now our kids, one kid is watching this and another kid is watching this. And do they really connect over it? I'm not sure that they're going to have a collective culture when they grow up.
How interesting will that be to see that play out? Like what?
Yeah. What does that mean?
Yeah. What do you connect over then?
What do you connect over? The real story about how the podcast started is that as I was writing Worldwide Crush, I was going back in time to get in touch with my 10-year-old feelings about Sean Cassidy. And in the midst of that, I saw that Sean Cassidy would be performing for the first time in 40 years. He gave his last concert in 1979. And in 2019, he's like, let's try this again. And he was doing a little performance at a winery in Southern California. And I was like, I think I have to go. Who am I if I'm not going to go and see this person who inspired this book that I'm writing? My friend Carolyn said, I'm going with you. I'm not letting you do this alone. So we got on a plane and ran out to California, and we had the most amazing experience because every single person in this room, we all had the same feelings at the same time. We were all doing the same thing in 1977 and 1978. We were all loving that person that was on the stage. And it was immediately bonding. All these people you've never met before. And now you're all friends because we had such strong feelings at the same time. It was really interesting. We come back home. Our friend Michelle, who is also a writer, was writing an article called Fangirling After 50. And she was like, I think I know who I can interview for this. I'm going to interview Kristin and Carolyn because they just went out to see Sean Cassidy. The conversation that the three of us had about that concert and Sean Cassidy and Duran Duran and Jimmy McNichol and all of the crushes, Scott Baio that we had when we were kids, when we were done, Carolyn said, I think this is a podcast. And the rest is history.
Wow. Just these moments that have happened in your life, the nun.
Yes.
Somebody saying this is a podcast. That's unreal.
It's true. Yeah, it's as if there's a path that is laid out for me and I just have to keep walking forward, just keep going.
And my best friend and I say this all the time is that sometimes we don't take the opportunities that we could because we're not looking. They've always been there, right? How many times do we just not see that the path is already there? It's just we have to open our eyes. And you have your eyes wide open and all these opportunities are coming to you.
And I had already been taught that I needed something, right? I needed to have my own corner of the world in which I expressed my creativity. And so I did have my eyes open and I was looking for a way to be fully and truly myself while I kept this family afloat at the same time.
Sharing this space with you today has been really special. When we left the book club that I heard you talk at, my best friend and I got in the car and we both had nothing to say because we were both just overcome by how phenomenal your story is and how inspiring, like through all the years of waiting for that story to be published. And now here you are sitting in front of us and it's a story that's so relatable. And I know that it got voted as one of the best upcoming novels for like summer of 2023 to read. And your words are so inspiring to me as somebody who I would say is like just starting my creativity journey and trying to have my eyes open to opportunities. So let's end with this question. What advice would you have for those who have yet to start their creative journey, but know that it's sitting just below the surface and it's something that they need to tap into? What advice would you give to them if you could just say to do one thing?
Well, first of all, thank you for all those kind words. That's really meaningful, right? You don't know when you create something if you have done something really important. You really don't know. And so to hear things like that, it's really important. So thank you. I have lots of advice. The first one is take your time. We oftentimes feel like it's a race, like we're going to run out of time to do the important thing. But I always tell people that there is no retirement age for creatives. It's not like the corporate world where your ideas might be outdated, or they're looking for fresh talent, or you've run out of corporate ladder to go up. There is no retirement age for creatives. So take it one step at a time. You don't have to do it all at once. You can do small pieces at a time. My go-to mantra is everything that is meant for me will come to me in its own time. And the reason that I cling to that is because this is not on my schedule. This is on something else's schedule, someone else's, whether it's the divine or God or whatever it is. There is a schedule, but it may not be to my liking. I want it to go faster. But the truth is, I didn't publish my first book until I was 55 years old. And most people would tell you that's too late. There's no retirement age for creatives. And the truth is that the 50s are a really magical time for women. It's when you not only have more time, but you have more bandwidth to devote to these things. So yes, do your creative work right now. Find your space. Find times to do the things that make you feel whole, knowing that when you turn 50, you will take off like a rocket. It will all come true for you in your 50s because you have the brain space to devote to it. Then there's a really important thing that I use that I think is important for people, especially if they have children in the house or if they're chauffeuring a lot. And it's just so hard to find time. Time is such an issue, right? I use something called the Pomodoro method, and you can Google it. It will tell you all about it. But what that is, it's the idea that you work for 25 minutes. You set a timer. You work for 25 minutes, and then you take a 5-minute break. And then you work for 25 minutes, and then you take a 5-minute break. That 25 minutes is called a Pomodoro. So instead of thinking, I've just dropped my child off at preschool, I have 2 hours, I have to race home and get as much done as I possibly can, go home at a leisurely pace, get into your space, and just set your watch for 25 minutes. You would be amazed at how much you can get done in 25 minutes. When you don't have it in you, when you've put the kids to bed, and you all you want to do is like sit and stare at the TV, sometimes what I'll do is before I turn on the TV, I'm just going to do one Pomodoro. I can do one Pomodoro. I don't have to do hours and hours. I know that seems like an overwhelming task. I don't have to do the whole task. I'm just going to do one Pomodoro. Oftentimes that one Pomodoro turns into several Pomodoros, and I'll get 2 hours of work in that I didn't even intend to because I get into a flow state. Or I just do the one Pomodoro, and again, you're amazed at how much you can get done in just 25 minutes. So no matter what your medium is, whether it's writing or painting or drawing or singing or making music or playing the guitar or whatever it is, just think about the one Pomodoro, and you might be able to find a little corner of your life. I think we put an awful lot of pressure on ourselves if we're going to do something that we have to commit so fully to it. But what I found out is that committing fully to it, like a full workday for me, is about 2 hours. 2 hours of writing, that's a full day. When you think about all of the other things that you have to do when you're raising children, I don't know how you do more than 2 hours. And so instead of beating yourself up for that, just recognize it. Just accept it. This is what it is for right now. When I'm in my 50s, I'll have more time.
What I love about the Pomodoro too is that either way, whether it's just one or you string 3 of them together, you still feel like you accomplished something.
Oh, you do. Yeah. Yeah, you really do.
Cool.
You're like, good for me.
It's similar to how I'm trying to think too. One of my goals was to get stronger in the new year, to be able to keep up with my daughter, because as she's getting older, she's wanting, harder activities, more skiing, more hiking. And I want to be able to keep up with her all the way until I'm 80, So I'm working on getting stronger. So rather than thinking, okay, I need to work out every day for the next month or 5 days a week for the next month, it's one workout at a time, one day at a time. Yes, one Pomodoro.
I think about that with my own workout schedule, which, my workout schedule, that's a joke. But one Pomodoro is better than 0 Pomodoros. And so that's sometimes what gets me on the bike, is because I'm just going to do one Pomodoro. Otherwise, I'm going to watch TV.
Such wise words, Kristin. Where can everybody find more of you? Like, what is the best place for them to go to find all things Kristin?
You can learn all about me, everything that you ever wanted to know, and buy my book at KristinNilsonBooks.com. And you can follow me on Instagram at kristin.nilson.writer. And I have one of those funky names that you're never going to spell correctly. So I'm actually going to spell it for you, which is really dorky, but it's going to help. Kristin is Kristin. Nilsen is Nilsen. It's not Nielsen. It's not Nelson. It's just me and a couple of other people who are Nilsen. And most of them are related to me.
I always love when I'm listening to a podcast and somebody spells something out, because I also think sometimes I just don't hear things correctly. So it's cheesy, but it's helpful. It's helpful.
Really helpful, because I cannot tell you, I take all the spellings of my name. Because there's so many ways to spell Kristin, so many ways to spell Nilsen. You can't fault people for getting it wrong. So I'm just going to tell you.
No. And I love it, because then that means they're going to find you and they're going to find Worldwide Crush, which they absolutely need to do.
Oh, and I do have to say one thing. It's really fun. On my website, in Worldwide Crush, I have hidden the names of celebrity crushes throughout history, throughout all of rock and roll history. And they might be spelled differently, or the names are turned around, and it's sort of a game to try and find them. And then you can go on my website, KristinNilsonBooks.com, and you can see how many of them you got. Isn't that so fun?
You are such a fun person. And I love that you have a podcast on pop culture.
Yes, right.
That is just so epic. And I mean, I'm 40, so I've got 10 years to go. And if I'm going to become as creative as Kristin, I'm very excited for what's going to
You're on your way, man. You are so on your way. The 50s are going to be so bright for you.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you so much, Kristin. And I'm going to have to maybe do this again sometime with the release of your second book.
I would love that. Yes. If you like Worldwide Crush, a sequel is coming out in the summer of 2025.
Excellent. If you wandered to this point in the episode, thank you for listening to the Wander Mode podcast. Please leave a review and subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at WanderModeCo. Reach me by email at julie@wandermode.co. Until next time, wander on.